Thank you. Thank you very much. I really hope I've cultivated the perfect balance between like wine and food, and that it all just flows. It's a massive privilege to be here with you guys. It's rare that I get to be in a room with people and talk about these ideas, I know which many of you think deeply about as well. And it's a privilege to be able to try and offer some form and strategy and long-term thinking about the mess that we find ourselves in and the chaotic world that we're in at the moment. I'm an economist, but I'm the author of Gen F. I'm also a former music teacher in public schools, former singer and performer. I wish I could get back into it, it's hard. Passionate AFL fan.
Which team?
Port Adelaide proud. Oh, is that a surprise? You guys should know I'm from Adelaide, come on. It's a true working class and actually a union team as well. Before I managed to crack the GFC labour market, which any millennials will know that was a tough go. I worked, 14 or so insecure jobs, and that's an important part of the experience of work and my experience of life that I bring to my work. I wrote Gen F because it's about young people, but it's about so much more. And it's what I wanted to do was diagnose the disease that was at the heart of a grief that I could feel across Australia of people who were feeling the loss of something. And I think the loss is a social democratic system that people's hearts still beat for, and which has been seriously eroded by decades of a vicious political project, which is called neoliberalism, but also it's something that's different now. And I'm going to talk about that. So remember this guy? Ooh, yeah. A fair go for those who have a go. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. But that is, what even is the fair go? It's rarely defined, it's bastardised by politicians, and it's once ubiquitous, but also nowhere. So I'm here to say that it's not at all about him. It's our strong egalitarian social contract that has been painstakingly built by everyday people working against the odds over generations. And it's a miraculous story. It's something that one area of thinking that I have got a lot of joy and inspiration out of is just putting together the story of the colonies of Australia and Federation and where it went. And to understand the fair go, you have to understand that when the British elites came here, they wanted to reproduce the same rigid class hierarchies of their empire. And the new hybrid British-Australian elites, they wanted a system that naturalised and expanded their wealth and their children's opportunities, the legacy of which we see today still in the private boys' colleges. But the agenda did not succeed, and we are all thankful for that, because convicts and workers, they rejected it. They formed their own ideals about equality and justice, and world-leading movements for workers' right to vote, to unionise and to improve their lot all happened here. Some key moments, 19th century into the 20th century, we had the Eureka Rebellion. The administration tried to tax miners. They said, don't tax us without representation. Why were they being taxed? They wanted to push them into the cities so they could work in the factories. 2 years later, relatedly, we won the 8-hour day because there were great labour shortages in Melbourne. The first Labor Party in the English-speaking world was formed here. The first legislated living wage in the Harvester Judgment, and then the Wave Hill Walkout, which expanded the award system and land rights through the power of Indigenous people unionising as well. The result of all these efforts is the fair go, and its core tenets are good living standards for all, addressing disadvantage, equality between citizens with a more equal distribution of income, and the opportunity to improve your lot in life. As Australia, though, was incorporated into the global economy and capital became more footloose, we embraced the ascendant neoliberal regime sweeping the world. We did it in a different way, many of you won't know that, but it was vicious nonetheless. This political project was about upward redistribution from workers and everyday people to private sector interests in corporations and especially finance, on the basis that higher profits would mean higher investment and more growth. And it was a great narrative, it was a great story. This regime, it ascended off the back of big inflation at the time, and the lesson for everyone is those in power never waste a crisis. They were waiting in the wings for their moment, and they struck. This regime was about reducing and controlling inflation by coming after workers and protecting the value of financial wealth. Everywhere, this regime was about flipping public value into private gain. Production in any capitalist economy is always dominated by a profit-seeking actor. They're programmed to hunt it down, like that's the operation of the system. But from the 1980s, profit maximisation, it entered hyperdrive. Everything in the way of business profit became a so-called barrier to growth. Privatisations intensified in the 90s across banks, telecommunications, airlines, utilities, and more. We outsourced to create new markets as well in government-funded services, which is an oxymoron. Consultancy exploded as a new business model, which was a type of privatising of public planning and public policy. Reorienting government activities to business needs was the main game, including tax cuts, dismantling unions and restructuring work to become more insecure from full-time and permanent. The safety net was weakened to increase workers' dependency on the welfare, on their jobs and whatever incomes their bosses could give them. And welfare entitlements were eliminated or became more targeted in the language we use in Australia. The direct beneficiaries of this heist, they told us that government was in fact inefficient, ineffective and self-interested. I would say a real projection. How is it that all three layers of government, their departments and functions, the largest employers and biggest spenders in the economy could all be support acts to the movers and shakers in the private sector? And it's insane to actually think about how powerful this ideology was when we look at where we're at now with Trumpism, where executive orders are flying out the wazoo and big state power is being used as a weapon everywhere. So the effect of this regime, I use this graph just because it's the easiest way to show. This is the value, all the value that's being created in the economy and GDP, and this is the share that's going to workers through their wages and their salaries, which was at, in Australia this is, and which was at a high point in the mid-70s, which coincided with the high point of unionisation. And then as this project was rolled out, the share of the pie going to workers has consistently declined and hit a record low just before the pandemic of 44%. And corporate share, of course, hit its record highs. There has been some recovery since the COVID pandemic, due in part to the industrial relations reforms that the federal government brought in the first term, but also a slowing pie and a slowing growth and a smaller pie. This is another graph I like to use because it's stark. I will say my caveat is that the data has been updated since I've done this, but it shows basically every decade, there's a couple of decades here, but since World War II, the share of economic growth that is going to the bottom 90%, which is in red. Post-war, with those big equality promoting institutions, 96% of growth to the bottom 90%. And the top 10% were scoring 4%. And in the 1980s, when this project is introduced, you see that flip. And suddenly in the 10 years after the GFC, the top 10% are capturing up to 93% of all the spoils. And so today we live in this kind of post-neoliberal era. We're living in the muck of the success of this project. The pace of corporate centralisation and concentration has seriously accelerated since the pandemic, which includes the consolidation of power across supply chains, pricing power, which contributed to the inflation wave that we saw after the pandemic, and the transfer of hundreds of billions of dollars to corporations and private banks. Australia's 47 billionaires doubled their collective net wealth in the first 2 years of the COVID crisis to 255 billion. While we were running around like headless chooks, they were planning for a future that they control and benefit from. In the US, we are witnessing, I think, a increased state capture of the most powerful segments of business in big tech, finance, and the arms industries. And I think they are seeking now to dissolve the taxation and redistribution powers of a social democratic state, channeling resources to themselves. They're removing regulations that are impeding growth and political systems that they consider to be no longer fit for purpose. And that includes democracy and the rules-based international order. All the while, we have the great pleasure of living in a time where our private and social lives have become the thing of commodities for big tech. all of the tools of data capture, surveillance and marketing. We know the effects that these are having on our brains, our capacity to focus, our capacity to connect with each other and to organise. So for a little light relief, I want to ask, because this is something that I think about, like, is this really, this has to be the most unimpressive crop of capitalist overlords in our time, really. I'm like an old, I don't want to be ageist, but my grandma used to collect newspaper articles, and I like to read the paper and do this sometimes as well. So Meta has just released a new form of Ray-Bans, which have a little computer on the side, and wearers can see incoming messages, live translations, and other AI-generated info overlaid into the glass, and they can respond to messages using tiny little finger gestures. And this is Zuckerberg at the release of these cool new Ray-Bans. He says, the promise of glasses is to preserve the sense of presence that you have when you're with other people. I think we've lost a little bit of that with phones, and we have the opportunity to get it back with glasses. And you have to ask yourself, what normal person wants overlaid text in front of their eyes while in the process of trying to connect with another human? No one that wants to actually connect with someone, which is maybe the answer to this question. It's only someone who is intentionally dislocated from normal human relationships that actually comes up with these ideas. And obviously someone who has no accountability to people, right? That's where these harebrained concepts come from. So what does it mean for this neoliberal regime, and what did it mean for someone who grew up in the 1980s? It was a harsher time. Yes, we had an explosion in new consumer goods, which were very cheap, and for that we can thank China's manufacturing boom. But what did that mask? What was that hiding? I think what that was hiding were termites that were working their way through the Australian economy to make the substance of life harder to secure. So we could secure more, goods and services in some way with our wage, but the actual building blocks of economic opportunity and life were becoming harder to reach. What this felt like for people growing up in this time was government was stepping away from investing directly in people. The new labour market was this liberalised, tougher, each for themselves one that was premised on the idea that university education made someone elite, made them, because you put on a suit and wore a blazer to work, you were somehow beyond the needs of collectivism and unionism. Public services became for-fee markets, dependence on job incomes rose, we saw the decline in full-time jobs, which was the great citizenship untethering because work is so critical to citizenship in Australia. The social fabric and collective institutions eroded, and these people became the guinea pigs of a digital tech boom after being socialised in normal social relations outside of that. What did this tangibly mean for a young person's life? And for that, I get a little more granular, and I use the rungs of the Fair Go ladder to do this. I should have some, there we go. So this is how I guess we can understand someone's trajectory for the building blocks of opportunity. You need to access some education, training or skills in order to get a job. Sometimes you get it on the job. We should do more of that. Without an income, it's hard to go to a bank and get a loan for a house. And without a secure home, it's hard to make decisions about your private life, including family formation. I think Australia's political class are still relying on the existence of this ladder for a lot of their political quips and, I guess, policy frames, but I think it's only just holding on. If not, it's been kicked away for a lot of young people in Australia. The question is, of course, it doesn't matter how hard you climb, if there are rungs of that ladder that are dissolving before your eyes, how on earth can you get ahead? The most educated generation in history, millennials and Gen Zs, they did everything they were told. They went and got their university education. This was how they were supposed to survive and thrive in this neoliberal labour market. Since writing the book, though, I think even access to university education now has entered into a space of degrading access, really, because of the way that the corporate vampires have sucked all the value out of it. Obviously, they're still grossly underfunded by the government. And, the collapse of in-person teaching, lecture halls that are empty. The HEC social contract no longer, I think, is in place because of rising fees, the fact that jobs aren't paying enough to pay off those fees. And then what's it all for anyway if you can't get a house? And then we move into the jobs sphere. And what did this project mean for jobs? They became more transient. The experience of pride in your work was stripped away. Big changes in the economy. They created an environment where employers could squeeze workers more on the job to help secure higher and stable profits. Quick returns for shareholders became the priority, with collective wage setting attacked in favour of enterprise bargaining and individual contracts. Unions were hamstrung. With wages now in the firing line, we had an orchestrated underinvestment, ensuring that there was never enough jobs for people who needed them, and that created a pressure cooker. And that pressure cooker helped business flip good jobs into bad ones, secure jobs into insecure ones. Insecure work exploded. We had a reversal of the great 20th century advancements in dignified work through sick and holiday pay, predictable hours. Millions of Australian workers, principally young workers, never got to experience those. They were the shock troops of this new system. Insufficient job opportunities then saw young people more likely to not be able to get into the labour market, not have enough work, or not be in work. And when they were waiting for the good jobs, they went to the universities and they hid there. And they accumulated degrees and more debts. They took shelter until they waited for better times, and the university system was an incredibly lucrative time for them. And then when they got in, they find that workplaces have become staler, more transactional, cultures were lower trust, employers accept higher turnover, the practice of bonuses almost extinct, as an example. Where training on the job was standard, employers now don't invest in training, they see it as purely a cost. They expect ready-made workers to come to their doorstep. Hello skills crisis, that's the reason why we're in this position. And many of the workplace control and intensification practices that were very common in blue-collar industries and challenged are everywhere in professional services. Many workers, they drank the Kool-Aid and considered themselves to be beyond unionism. And the evidence of what the experience of bad jobs was here is a graph that shows what happened to incomes, real incomes, after the GFC. So you have the 10 years before the GFC. These blocks all represent age groups, 15 to 24, up to 65 and over in the dark red. And then this is the 10 years after the GFC. Workers under 34 were the only age groups to go backwards in real incomes in that 10 years after the GFC. That was a lost decade. And this is a Productivity Commission graph and their own study, which shows the reason why they went backwards is because their jobs got shitter, right? This is insecure work. And while they were working hard to establish themselves in a labour market that was very hostile to them, something else got further away from them. Housing. Are we shelving the Australian dream? I think we can see the state of the crisis of our housing system has been well established, including in Jeff's opening remarks. What happened? Basically, government abandoned supply. It used to build houses. It stopped doing that. It stopped concessional lending. It stopped helping people to buy houses. It let private finance take over. And once financial markets exploded through deregulation, then the tax incentives flowed. Then, to the value of over $14 billion in concessions a year. Less houses, a lot more money flowing. No surprise that prices went up. And what that meant for 25 to 34-year-olds, while they were more likely to own a home in the 1980s, over 60% of them, now it's less than 37%. This is the key, the largest working age population now. And the collapse for people in the bottom 20% of that group, so the poorest, have fallen the furthest of any other age group, any group at all in the OECD. So what we are seeing is actually OECD leading in terms of the collapse of this right and access. We have transformed housing into a big casino, and it's delivered massive wealth to a small strata of older wealthy people, and it's shut out young people and many others from a basic need. So many young workers, they're asking themselves, what is the point? What's the point of work if I can't get a house? The damage that cascades from the loss of access to housing is seismic. So here we are now on the precipice of our egalitarian traditions because labour is no longer enough to secure one's life. That was the basis for the life that people fought for when they came here. Reward for work is in our DNA. Unlike the mother country, common people could settle here, work hard, buy a home, raise a family and have a good life. Many of the people who came here were escaping rigid class relations that saw them exploited by both landowners and bosses. For the Irish, it was also a hostile occupying force. And now we are backsliding from the homeowners' democracy, I think perfectly encapsulated by Kath and Kim, which was actually, it was considered to be in bogan poor taste because these were working people who could afford leisure time and to go to the shops and buy stuff. But like, this is now the high point, right? And we are descending back to the conditions that many people fought to get away from when they came here, where we pay our rents to the landowners, and then we're exploited on the job as well. There is no emancipation, there is no freedom. Pretty clear, like this is causing serious agony about choices about private lives. Like the UN Declaration of Human Rights recognises that a right to a home is about the right to a family. If you don't have a secure roof over your head, how on earth can you make those decisions? And fertility choices are now happening in very hostile conditions, and unsurprisingly, many working age millennials and younger people are deciding not to have children or less children because of this situation. So here we are now in this post-neoliberal time, gloves are off, and the dark shadow of history is hanging over us. We know that a fledgling British Empire led to World War, and things that keep me up at night are questioning what happens when the US crumbles. Is it going to pull us all down with it? And what's left behind in this time is a more brazen, gloves-off system with all of the confusion and chaos and destruction that brings. Total freedom of capital must reign, and that's not just for affecting the countries who are in the tentacles of the US Anglo-war machine, including Palestine, but capitalism's face is changing in the neoliberal economies in the West as well. I should say, the other important question to ask is Australia exceptional? Historically, the winds of big global change don't blow for 4 or 5 years. We always have a bit of a delay, in part because of the design of our institutions. And I certainly gave my shot at advising and being a part of a social democratic Labor government as part of trying to make Australia the exception in a time when the feeling is that maybe this change is inevitable. I think we should still hold on to the hope that there's a buffer and we have time. So what is a new modern fair go? Because if it's exceptional, then I want to put forward some key tenets for it. This is important for younger generations, but this is about everyone and our future, because this is a crossroad moment for us. Will we become a country where the birth lottery determines your life chances, or can we seize the moment and rebuild a society where good lives and secure incomes are extended to all? We need a new economic paradigm that speaks to the failures of private control over every aspect of working people's lives and puts public investment back in control. Essentially, we want to, I think, reclaim some of the Fordist era planning over the life course. What are the building blocks of the fair go? And to answer this, I ask, what are the most relevant components strategically to resolving the crisis and dysfunction ahead of us and for restoring collective power again? We need biggest bang for buck. We can't have infinite programs. Here are mine. Tax wealth and reduce taxes on wealth, and on work. And I'm going to return to this point in a sec. We do need a new public housing agenda. Fixing this crisis permanently now depends on us taking control of supply. The private sector have had it in their hands, quite clear that they can't resolve this crisis for us. If they can't build homes at a price that average people can afford, then it's the government's responsibility to step in and build. The SA Housing Trust built over half of all homes in the post-war years, and a public builder can do it again. I'm a big fan of modular housing. I think this is our opening. I think we should build a public modular housing industry with good union jobs, secure building materials at lower costs. We can avoid some of the argy-bargy with the private sector they can do the standard builds, we're going to do the sexy modular ones. And we can put manufacturing in strategic places where people need jobs. Other important measures, of course, unwinding tax incentives. We know we've got to do that. Breaking the private banking monopoly. I think we should get a public bank and extend cheaper credit or some other form of concessional lending. And regulate to slow or diminish investor lending. We need a program of good jobs, and that means a genuine full employment economy where government uses its investment power to generate enough jobs for people who need them and uses active labour market policies, including a new Commonwealth Employment Service. A good jobs agenda should include expanded public sector employment. We have only 15% of all jobs in Australia in the public sector. We should be at least double that, 30%, which is closer to a lot of European countries. There is no shortage of important work to be done, from modular housing construction to climate adaptation, healthcare education, rebuilt career pathways for our youth. We have to expand the rights to collectively bargain, raise wages, unionise, organise, and create better settings that give unions the capacity to do their jobs. And I think this means resourcing bargaining, whether that's bargaining fees or union-only agreements, or public resourcing. This isn't just about giving workers a better job, because obviously that is life-changing. It's about unleashing the power of them through their unions to demand the new fair go, leveraging their power in workplaces and industries as the backbone of a large progressive bloc, convening new constituencies and providing countervailing power to business interests who will try and stop us. We need to curtail private power. Wrong order. Let's say an insourcing agenda, where government is spending billions of dollars to fund things that we need. It's a mystery to me that we still allow for-profit actors to do this work. I think we should have an insourcing agenda across energy, housing, healthcare education, employment services and defence. This is also about reducing corporate power. Curtailing corporate power, breakups. Monopolisation is a serious problem in Australia. We don't have a competitive economy. What is the role of the private sector? That's a bigger question, but I think we should be talking about price controls for essentials and critical inputs. Our welfare system, maybe some of you have the indignity of having to deal with this system, but it still has baked into it its dark history as a weapon of wage suppression and punishment for people who are not in work, and it needs an urgent upgrade because it's still based on these two principles, totally ill-fit. One, that there's enough jobs, there aren't, and that performing your desire to return to wage labour is the only way to validate your access to an income support payment. That system is out of touch. Plenty of people can't work, including millions of women who are engaged in care work. So all payments should reflect dignified incomes. I got an AFR op-ed in this week. Was it? No, it was last week. Co-written with Michael Wright, who's the National Secretary of the ETU. And it ruffled some feathers. We're very happy that it was placed in the AFR. This is a key point. I think Jeff well outlined this in his opening remarks. The stage 3 income tax debate, I think, distracted attentions on progressive tax debate to wage earners. And I think that was obfuscating the bigger game. And we do pride ourselves in Australia in having a strong social contract for tax. But the system is taking the piss at this point. Yes, overall, half of all federal taxation is paid by wage earners. It's been this way since the 70s, but the economy has changed a lot in this time. Deregulation in financial markets, tax cuts, capital gains, investment in housing. The result is the housing system's a casino. Returns to capital are running far ahead of wages over the last 10 years. 9.4% was the return, average ASX return, housing 5.8%, and wages 2.5%. Wealth inequality is at its highest point in 2 decades, and there is nothing stopping it. Instead of compensating for this imbalance, our tax system is aggravating it. Workers earned $100 billion less than capital gains last year, despite doing all the jobs that keep the economy going. But they're taxed more, 24% versus 1.9% in capital gains. The average Sydney home increased by $16,000 more than the average Sydney worker earned all year. Our tax system can't keep treating passive income the same as income through work. We argued in our op-ed that this is creating a society that's less innovative, productive, one where hard work is devalued and living standards will decline. We should cut taxes for workers and lift the contribution of wealth, starting with the CGT discount, rebates to inputs like diesel and large super balances. I would also say inheritance taxes, given that's the point where the gain is realised. We have a generation of young people who see no hope in work. They are engaging in risky financial speculation with cryptocurrency, other financial products. This is the product of a generation that can't see reward for work, and that is a productivity tanker. I think this now workers versus wealth holders, yes, acknowledging many workers also hold wealth, but this dynamic, I think, is now at the centre of our political crisis and our economic crisis, and the one that I will be focusing my attention on for the years to come. The mission, I believe in mass politics, putting my cards on the table. That means building broad constituencies, working across divides, coalescing large groups of people behind material issues, largest groups as possible. I'm not about groupsicles or pure programs. I'm about strong unions and workplace democracy. Unions are the largest volunteer organisations in the country, and they reach directly into the heart of our economy. I'm about people building bonds, changing their ideas of what's possible when exercising power through real life engagement, from community groups through to mainstream politics. And the idea is that we build a broad-based pulse of democratic participation and change around key material class issues that are going to change people's lives, and we influence Parliament and beyond through that process. I would add independent foreign policy being a pretty important part of that strategy as well. I was very chuffed that Mr. Varoufakis gave a little stamp of approval to my book. I recommend you read it because he said there's lots of great ideas about what we can do. He's so top-notch. Like, I think he's a brilliant thinker. I'm not just saying that because he endorsed my book. There are very few thinkers who are taking the risks and kind of coming up with big, new stories the way that he is. What's working? I mean, how do you explain organisation? Collective problem solving, popular politics have expanded economic and social freedoms, finding commonality and working together around shared problems, real life spaces of humanness. Yes, the internet can help us, but together, looking eye to eye with each other and holding space together is where democracy flourishes. Creating relationships of accountability to each other, that's scary but also critical. It's about organisation, it's about affiliations, it's about membership, participation, democratic decision making, and it's about breathing life into existing organisations, not just starting new ones. I always return to this quote by Mariame Makaba, who's an American activist and author, and when I'm feeling like things are tough and it's easy to feel that way, I have to remind myself that this is a discipline, this is a practice, and organisations like the Fabians and gatherings like this one, they matter. What gives me hope is the people in this room and the many more who I know, they know it's time for change in Australia. We can work together across the spectrum to forge it, ideas, institutions, and organisation. Where does the future even come from? Because we need to reclaim it. Yes, it came through industrialisation, the rise of the people as a political force, through 18th century, 19th century movements for liberty, from empire, the vote, unionism. But this was the first time where people could imagine a life different to that they were living every day, different to that of their parents. And this was because there was a rise of a surplus. A new working class could now contest its distribution and what that distribution could do for living standards. And Australia was world leading in imagining what we could do. Neoliberalism aimed to reorient the value of what we all produce to capital, eroding our capacity to distribute growth more fairly. And this current gloves-off capitalism seeks to crush dissent and any hope of an alternative. So we're back at this historic juncture. It's time to reclaim the mission of our predecessors and we are asserting a new battle over the surplus. Thank you.
Thank you.
You don't need that.
Don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
That was amazing. It's Q&A time. How good is that? I'm sure you've all got some good questions to ask. So Robin's very kindly going to go around with the microphone. So if you've got a question, pop your hand up and we will go from there. Let's start at the front, shall we, Robin? Just to save your legs, if that's easy. And then we'll come to the back to you afterwards, sir. Sit down and let you take command of the stage.
Yeah.
I listened with great interest to what you had to say, and I think you've summed up stuff that I've been thinking about in a less coherent way for quite some time. I'm interested, though, in your remedies for how you think we can change things, because I guess my great fear is that this is now a problem beyond national boundaries, that the people who actually benefit, who are actually in the the uber capitalist class, sure, we've got Gina Reinhardt and Clive Palmer, but in the scale of who's, organising what happens to us, like deregulation movements and that sort of thing, it's the global capitalists, and we don't have the means, we don't have the machinery to be able to do that, and neither does other forms of globalism.
I mean, yeah, we just had the legacy of the Whitlam dismissal, which was, only one coup we've had in Australia, right, from foreign entities. How best to answer this? It is, I think, the key question. I peddle a type of kind of left nationalist frame because I think we have to believe that at some point Australia can strike out on its own. We've failed to do that so far. We moved from the British Empire and we just sidestepped into the orbit of the US. It's hard to see how we can build something here that doesn't move in tandem with movements across the world, particularly in, I would say, in the Anglo world where we face similar conditions. And I would say we can see ahead of us what's going to happen if we don't kind of start moving with them. The extent of control and power that the US holds over us cannot be underestimated. It's a weird experience to propagate like a democratic Australian politic, knowing quite well how difficult it is to actually do that here. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. I take a lot of inspiration from times where we have punched above our weight. I'm thinking of Evatt and foreign policy around full employment and after the Depression, where like this ragtag weirdo dude just rocked up to international forums and pushed as hard as he could for proper full employment. And seemed to have some sort of impact. Off the back of course, he didn't act independently. Australia was a very egalitarian, democratic, participatory, high participation place. So it's not the full answer, but it is an absolute important one. Yeah.
That this is the generation that has experienced collective action and community involvement. Getting the Gen Zs and the younger groups involved is going to be difficult because of the fractioning of the social impact of the electronic devices. Mm-hmm. So how do you suggest that we can get that group of people active in collective action when it's this group that's got the experience of it and the understandings of how to do it?
This is a key strategic thing I pick up in the book. I have a chapter called Wrong Tools, and I try to understand the experience of young people who have grown up with devices, with their heads in screens. My response to this is, like, for a good number of years, I used to think, like, is it just me that's out of touch? Do I need to now, like, apply myself mentally, spiritually to this new regime of everything mediated through big tech? But I also have been, my education is in following technology and ownership, and I know that the people who own these things have every interest in isolating us, making us feel disempowered, and stopping us from organising. And so it's on that basis that I advocate for young people to get away from screens. I would associate the massive explosion in mental health issues, not directly with it, but it is a key factor at a time when their brains should be about forming social relationships as part of finding out who they are as people. Socialising in real life is critical to that, and it's hard to see how they can develop to become full, conscious people without more face-to-face engagement. So that's something I'd go into some depth actually in the book. I would say what we've noticed lately, there's some encouraging signs. There's a new, ACTU have a new bunch of research out on young people and their thoughts on unions. And now they are, of all the age groups, the most interested in unionism in real life. They don't fully understand or know how it is that unions are going to make their lives better, but they know that they want to be in them and they want to do stuff. We've also seen a big rise in young people seeking out cultural experiences, buying more tickets, going to events. They're getting to a point where they're sort of desperate for that real life experience. So I think in sum, I would say it's difficult to understand how we could politically mobilise young people around the things they want to when they are still building social bonds and learning how to do that most basic stuff. So I think it's how do we bridge them out? I think we have to get people away from screens. And in part, the absolute shit show that is big tech, if you've ever been on a social media account lately, you'll notice that it's not much job. They're kind of doing the job for us because they are so hungry to, like, commodify every aspect of our existence that people are starting to feel really empty. And so they are actually opting out of using social media a lot more. So potentially we're on the cusp of a move away now.
Thanks, Alison. We've often heard that Australia is about to experience a very significant large wealth transfer by 2050. I think it's 3.5 trillion was a number produced by the Productivity Commission. Now, it often feels in debate that there's this, and maybe from a young perspective, this hope of the Bank of Mum and Dad will fix these issues. However, you know, this transfer most likely will further entrench societal wealth divides. Do you think that we are definitely moving away from this idea of any form of meritocracy, which of course was destroyed with the neoliberal project, towards that inheritocracy, even on a small scale, when we don't even consider, of course, large capital, but even in a more local sense, that we're relying on mum and dad's home that has increased in value to fix the issues of Generation Z and Alpha kids?
Yeah, gosh, it's terrifying. 5.4 trillion to be passed down to boomers' kids. Huh?
3.5.
Oh, well, I put 5.4 in my article, so.
It could have increased. I was 23.
No, yeah, my data's more up to date. Anyway, it's a lot of money. It's a lot. Over the next 2 decades, will be passed to boomers' children. I lose sleep thinking about the children of renters, and in part, a personal anecdote. Like I came from a poorer working class family. My dad was a plumber, my mum's a nurse. We relied also on the welfare system at various times of unemployment. And for me, being able to get a university education, get out of precarity and like establish myself in like good jobs, good work, that felt like, wow, this is a type of mobility. And now I'm here and it's like, no, for what purpose, right? Imagine for the kid of a renting family, like what chance do they have really And then you've got the geographic effects of the housing crisis, and they're going to be concentrated more and more in like ghettos. Another anecdote I think I've noticed as I have retained a sense of like anger and fire about my material conditions, a sense of like, I don't know, placated sort of meh among my propertied friends. People who stood to inherit something or knew that they would, maybe their only child. There's a sense of, you know what, work didn't work out for me, but that's all right because when mum and dad kick the bucket, I'm going to have a house, right? So this is why I think I've tried to use intergenerational equality as my container for talking about class inequality, but we are very clearly looking at a fissuring that's happening now. We are having now 2 kids going to the same school, maybe the local public school in Northcote, and the one kid that's the kid of a renting family and the one that stands to inherit a property, they're going to have dramatically different life chances, and that's now. So when that 5.4 trillion starts flowing, we're not looking at a new generation of innovators and entrepreneurs. We're looking at, I would say, people who are going to be living unproductive lifestyles off the back of workers, if I may.